Hello everyone, welcome to this video. This is a live stream tutorial on creating a replica of Rider, the pretty popular mobile game. And this is what it's going to look like. This is my recreation inside of Unity. If I go ahead and hit play here, you can see that we have this small car, and that if we hold down our mouse button, we can move him. And if we hold down our mouse button while in the air, we can rotate him. So we have to make sure that we always land on our wheels and that we kind of go through this course. And of course you can add points for doing it quickly. There you go, I messed up, and that would mean that we had to restart. You can add points for doing multiple flips, for creating perfect landings if you land flat on a surface, and you can create all kinds of different surfaces. And the way that I have this set up is using a Bezier curve collider. So we can actually really easily, inside of the editor, sculpt our level using this Bezier curve editor, and I'm going to show you how to set that up using a simple extension that I've modified a bit to suit this tutorial. And also, of course, we have some neon on the lines here, which is a pretty cool effect. And finally, we have the camera and car controllers. So that's basically the stuff that makes up this game. And I really do encourage you to add a bunch of more stuff to it. If you want some inspiration as to what you can go ahead and add to this tutorial, I suggest checking out the Rider app. As you see it here, it's on the iOS and Android stores. So that's pretty much it, and without further ado, let's jump into the video. So let's start by creating a new project here. So we'll go File, New Project, and let's go ahead and call this 2D, and let's go ahead and call it Rider. And let's hit, actually Rider Replica is probably better, and then let's hit Create Project. And I've had some issues recently with Unity not really wanting to start in certain occasions. Hopefully it's not going to do that now, but if it is, that's just fine. Meanwhile, I can say that this video is also going to be uploaded to YouTube. To those of you guys watching on stream, if you have to leave during the stream, that's okay, don't worry. We'll also upload it to YouTube afterwards. And you should be able to download the entire project along with all the stuff that I'm using on GitHub. There will be a link for that in the description of the YouTube video. But it looks like Unity is going to behave this time, so that's awesome. The first thing that we can go ahead and do is maybe change the background color of our main camera to a more darker saturated, or at least a more saturated blue. And what I really want to do here is set it up to use post-processing effects right away, because I want to get that cool glowy retro look. And one of the ways to achieve that is using post-processing effects, in other ways color correction. I want to get a vignette, I want to modify our colors a tiny bit, and finally I want to get that cool glow. So I think I'm going to do that right away so that we can see that kind of working, and then we can set up all of the other stuff afterwards. So first, let's go ahead and save this scene here. Let's save it as just main for now, and we can maybe right click and go in and create a tiny sprite here, and we're just going to select a default UI sprite just so we have something here that we can color correct based on. Now we can go to the asset store and we can download an asset called the post-processing stack. So we'll search for post-processing, and we should see it here. It's created by Unity themselves. We'll just go ahead and hit import once it loads here, and this will allow us to add all kinds of post-processing effects like bloom, like color correction and color grading, motion blur, vignettes, all that good stuff. We just want to get this in right away so that we can kind of fine tweak the visuals of our game with these settings already applied. I feel that works better for a game like this. So we'll just wait for it to load in all of the necessary assets. And meanwhile, I'll have a look at the chat here to see how people are doing. People are hyped. That's awesome. Welcome to all the people who just joined. And yeah, so now we have our post-processing stack in here. And what we want to do is select our main camera. We want to change the projection size here to something like 7, just to zoom out a little bit. And we can go ahead now and add a new component. And this is going to be the post-processing behavior. Now we need a profile, in other words, the settings for our color correct. And we need to create this in the project by going create, post-processing profile, and we'll call this CC for color correction. Then we can select our main camera and drag in our CC object. And now we can go ahead and add, first of all, a vignette. There we go. Maybe decrease the intensity on that a bit. We can also add some color grading. And here I want to select from the tone mapper the filmic aces look. I really like this look, but it does mean that we have to brighten up things quite a bit. And this is actually also the color grading that Unreal uses. So yeah, it's pretty popular in game dev circles. So I'll just brighten up the background a tiny bit there, and I feel it gives this really saturated, contrasty look that I really like, especially for this style. So now that we have our color grading in place, we can maybe also bump up the exposure a tiny bit. I'm going to put it to 0.5. I feel that bumping up the exposure a bit makes everything look just a tiny bit cooler, but it also means that you do have to go back and adjust the background color of your camera. So now I feel that this is looking kind of decent. We can also go ahead and turn on some motion blur, but I don't want to exaggerate this, so I'm going to put it to something like 230 on the shutter angle, not to blur everything out too much. And I think that's pretty much all of the settings that we're going to set in here. You could also go ahead and add some bloom this way, but I'm going to show you a way of creating a glow that gives you much more control than the default built-in bloom here. So now we can save this and we can go ahead and delete our new sprite. Instead, we want to start creating some lines. And again, to do this, we're going to be using an editor extension, just two very simple scripts, one that you apply to the object and one that makes it editable through the Unity editor. And these are actually taken from an old post from the Brackeys forum. And let me just see if I can find that post here. I actually don't have a link ready, which I really should have had here. Bezier curve line. Let me just see if I can find this Unity. Bezier curve collider. Sorry, I should really have had this ready. Here, a set of custom colliders for Unity here. Custom 2D colliders, it's by Guy Quad, and he created this a couple of years ago and posted it on the Brackeys forum, and it includes custom colliders for both Bezier curve colliders, but also a bunch of other shapes, and they are really, really cool. I did have to go in and update them a tiny bit to not spit out warnings, and also to make them edit a line renderer so they are actually visible, so they're not only colliders, but actually render lines, and also to make them movable inside of the Unity editor. So I've taken this updated version and I've uploaded it. So I'm going to post a link right now to the stream here if you want to use it. And I'm also, of course, going to have a link for this in the description of the video. And I've, of course, downloaded this already. It's called the Bezier Curve Lines Unity package. And if we just take this now and drag it into Unity, we can see that I have two scripts, one for the Bezier Curve Collider and one for the Bezier Curve Collider editor. There's also a license here, but it basically just says that it's free to use. But if you want to redistribute it, you have to include this license, as I've done here. So you can use it in any way, also commercially. That's totally fine. You can use this in your games and then sell them. That's totally okay. So now if we go ahead and right click and create an empty object, and we can call this our line. Actually, let's call it line segment. And now we can hit add component. And we can go under physics 2D, scroll to the bottom and select the Bezier Curve Collider 2D. And there we go. It actually draws a line. It's currently a very ugly line, as well as a collider inside it here. That's just a fancy edge collider. And we can now edit this inside of the editor. So let's go ahead and drag the start point here over here. We can maybe make it look something like this. We can go ahead and add another point. To do that, we go under the Bezier Curve Collider 2D and hit add point in order to create another point here. We can kind of smooth it out so it doesn't look quite as ugly. Let's create another point again. And we can actually go through and create as many points here as we'd like. But I'm just going to create a fairly simple terrain here that we can drive along. And I definitely recommend you to spend much more time on it than I do here. I just want to show you the basics of how this works. So now that we've created this line, we probably want to make it look a bit better. This weird purple line isn't really cool. So what we can do is actually go into our line render and configure it. I also probably want to bump up the smoothness of our line here. You can see if I decrease this, it's very clear that it's made up of segments. And if I increase it, it becomes smoother and smoother. I found that a pretty good point is about around 20. That makes everything look fairly smooth and also makes the collision handle fairly smoothly. So now we can go inside of our line renderer. And here I first want to decrease the width to something like 0.15. I think that's a pretty good width for the line that we want. And I also want to smooth out the endings of this line here. I think that looks better. It's not actually something they do in the game, but I think it's better if we go ahead and put end cap vertices here to about 3 to create that kind of smoothed out ending of the line. I think, yeah, it's a matter of personal preference, but I just kind of like that. And finally, we need to go ahead and add a custom material to our line. So we'll go into our project, right click, go material, and we'll call this our line. And we can make a purple line first. And of course, we need to choose a shader. And normally for lines like this, you would maybe use an unlit shader or a sprite shader, but these don't really glow. So how do we add glowing to our line? Well, the answer is using another custom extension. And this one is called MK Glow Free. I'm of course also going to have a link for this in the description, as well as throw a link to it in the chat. So there you go. And this is a totally free asset. In fact, it's a free version of a paid asset that has more features, but I haven't personally run into anything where I needed the pro version just yet. So feel free to download this for free off the asset store. And that's exactly what we are going to do. We are going to search for MK Glow Free, and it should pop up right here. And we just want to go ahead and import that into Unity. And this will basically allow us to create materials that glow. That's pretty much all we're doing here. So let's hit import. And we'll wait for everything to load into Unity. Meanwhile, I'll just have a look in the chat here. And yeah, we're over 300 viewers. That's awesome. So happy you guys are joining in. This tutorial today is pretty fun. It's always nice to get to play with glows and especially Bezier curve editors. There's just something really cool about them. So awesome that you guys are joining in. I hope you're loving this stream so far. And I'm definitely looking forward to answering some questions later. So I hope you guys are too. And yeah, people are going nuts in the chat. That's awesome. But it looks like it's loaded in here. And all we need to do is go under MK. Now you see here we can go under MK Glow Free, and they've actually gone ahead and included a demo scene. So you can definitely open this up and have a look at how everything is working. They demonstrate a few different examples of these shaders, but this is actually applied to 3D objects, and we only want to apply it to a simple two-dimensional line. So our use case is actually much simpler. What we want to do, if we go back here, is first of all go to our main camera and add the MK Glow Free script. And this does have a custom icon, but it is basically just like any other component. And here we can go ahead and choose what we want to glow. We can change the glow type from full screen if you want the entire screen to glow, or selective if we only want a certain layer to glow, which we do. And we only want lines to glow. So let's go ahead and add a new layer here. And let's call this the lines layer. Let's then select our line segment and add it to that layer. Now we can go under our main camera, and on the glow layer, we'll select nothing to deselect everything, and then make sure to only select our lines layer. You will also see that this doesn't make our line glow right away. And that's because we need to add a glow material to this line. Luckily, we've already created the material. We just need to go in here and select the right shader. And the right shader is under MK, Glow, Selective. And here we can now choose all of the different shaders that allow us to create this selective glow effect. And what you want to choose is going to completely depend on what you want to glow and how many settings you want. I have found that sprites and then default works pretty well. However, we do need to include a glow texture for this to show up. You can see if I go and select a texture here, it's actually not glowing yet. And that's because, of course, we also, okay, let me just select none here. We need to also reference or make sure to insert this material into our line segment. So let's select our line segment. Let's go under materials and drag in our line purple. There we go. But you can see it's still not glowing, and that's because we actually need to use a glow texture. If I hit select here, you can see if I choose one of these textures in my project, it starts to work, and it's going to mimic the different colors that are seen in this texture. So you can actually create really cool and advanced glow effects using this texture. But we just want a uniform glow, and we want to be able to just simply tint it using the tint and color glow variables. So instead of using a custom texture, let's just use a completely white texture. And to do that, we'll go into Photoshop and we'll create a simple white 2x2 square. That's all we need, just a completely white block. So let's go File, New, and here we'll just create a very simple, let's make it 16x16 white background, hit create, and there we go. That's all we need to have here. We can then save this, so save as, and you can of course just search for this, just white square. You could also make it in any other program, or you could download my project if you don't know how to get a white square. It's all you need. So now we go to desktop projects and let's search for our project here. We called it Rider Replica. And let's put this as white inside of the assets folder. And yes, you can just save Photoshop files directly into Unity and they will appear. So there we go. We have our white square. And now if we go and select our line purple material, drag in our white square, you can see that our entire line glows up. Yay! So now we can select a tint here. I'm going to select kind of a purple tint and I'm going to tint it just a tiny bit. And this is the actual line part. However, it's not currently really showing, is it? That's okay. We can just go ahead and select a glow color and change this to a purple and drag that over. And you can now see that we can make our line color or our line glow with a specific color. We can also control the power of that color in here if you want to control it for individual segments. And you have a bunch of other settings if you're using a texture. Okay, so now that we have adjusted our glow color, we can adjust how we want our line to glow separately. And this is the primary reason why I wanted to use this shader instead of just applying a bloom to a colored line. That's because applying a bloom doesn't necessarily allow us to control individually the color of our line and the color of our glow. But here you can see I can actually tint my line completely white and then still have the glow. So I'm just going to have it almost white, just a tiny bit of purple here, so it's still really bright. And I think that looks pretty cool. I'm also going to go into my camera and for all of the line segments, so under the MK Glow free component, I'm going to go ahead and maybe bump down the glow a bit. So samples and iterations is just fine, but I am going to go ahead and bump down the intensity a bit. And you can definitely also play around with the spray here until you get something, or the spread, until you get something that you think looks nice. So I think that looks pretty good and we'll just leave it as is. Cool, so now we've created a glowing line segment that we can edit inside of our editor. Let's go ahead and maybe just create another quick line segment here just to show you how easy it is. So let's duplicate our current line segment. Let's go ahead and move this one over. And let's go ahead and inside of our Bezier curve collider here, we'll hit reset. Whoops, something is happening here that we do not want to happen. I think maybe the reason why is, yeah, okay. So whenever we are moving line segments like this, we actually want to go into our line renderer and make sure to disable use world space. That will make it follow around our object locally so we can easily move them. That's something I actually forgot to add to the extension to do that automatically. So just make sure to do that manually. I might go ahead and edit the extension before this gets uploaded to YouTube. So to the people of downloading, this will automatically be set to false because of course we want it to follow around our object here. So now we can go ahead and maybe adjust this to suit the other one. I'm actually going to quickly remove a few points here and just have this be a very tiny little segment. And let's have it point kind of upwards like in my original level. Something like this looks pretty good. And I just wanted to show you how easy it is to create a separate color here. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate our material. And let's call this one line green. And let's select our second line segment. And let's go ahead and adjust or change the material here to line green. And this time we just want to go ahead and simply change the hue to green and do the same thing with the tint here. Change that to green as well. And I actually want this to be a bit more saturated. There we go. So now we have both a purple and a green segment. Awesome. So now we're pretty much ready to add a car controller. Before we do that, I just want to have a look inside of the Twitch chat here. Everything is looking good. That's awesome. You guys are doing great. See if there's any questions. Will this be on YouTube? Yes, it will. It will be on YouTube tomorrow evening. And yeah, I think we're ready to continue. Awesome. So now we can go and add our actual car. And I've gone ahead and created a simple sprite that looks a bit like the original. It's called Rider here. You can of course use any sprite that you want, and I'll make this available for download along with the GitHub project. So if you want to use it or this particular sprite yourself, you can definitely do that. And right now let's just go ahead and drag this one in. I think it's a bit too big, so I'm going to adjust the pixels per unit on the asset in the project panel here to about 150, and let's hit apply. That looks a bit better in terms of scale. But on that, we don't need to adjust any import settings. We can just go and select our rider. And first we probably want to add some kind of collider. So let's create a polygon collider 2D. And I don't want this to be too sophisticated. Let's hit edit collider, and we can hold down Control and click on points in order to remove them. And I want to remove most of these as I want it to be very simple. And then we can kind of sculpt out our car. And the most important thing for me is that the car moves smoothly along the surface. And this for me means that we are trying to avoid really ragged and harsh edges. So that's more important than actually finding the shape of our car. And I think this here looks pretty good because we have this very smooth curve in front of the car, which should make sure that it doesn't get stuck too easily. So now if we stop editing that, we can go and add another component. And this here is going to be the rigid body 2D. And this should make it so that if we hit play, our car actually falls to the ground. And indeed it does. Awesome. So now we of course want to go ahead and create some controls for our car. But in order to do that, we first need to set up a few physics settings in order for it to behave correctly. And of course, whenever it comes to physics settings in Unity, it can be really tough to get them right. So I've gone ahead and done a bit of experimenting for you, and I found that a mass of around 5 works pretty well in this case. I've tried setting the linear drag to a bunch of different values, but I found that around 0.3 makes for a fairly smooth riding experience. I wanted quite a bit of angular drag actually. Around 3 worked well for my controller. And we can just leave the gravity scale at 1. I also make sure to set the collision detection to continuous. I found that avoids quite a few bugs with collision if you're traveling quickly. So those are kind of the settings that I've been using. I don't apply any constraints or anything like that, just a few settings in here. And one pretty important thing is I also make sure to apply a physics material. Because right now, if we hit play, our car stands completely still, even though he's kind of standing on a slope. And I find it's pretty, or a lot nicer if the rider and the line doesn't have any friction between them. So if we go ahead and right click and create a physics material, and let's call this the line or the rider physics mat. And we select our rider here and drag this into our rigid bodies material slot. And then select our rider physics mat. We can change the friction, and I'm just going to set it to a straight 0. So now our rider should just glide around on our line. And as you can see, he does. This is nicer because we are imagining that our rider has actual wheels. And if he's standing on the slope, unless he's hitting the brakes, he is definitely going to roll down it. So that's pretty much the same as just putting him without wheel, just as a normal surface, but without any friction. So yeah, this way we don't actually have to create the wheels, but we're kind of giving the impression that he is driving. And now it's actually time to go ahead and create our actual controller. So let's hit add component, and let's create a car controller. We're going to select C#, hit create and add. Let's double click it to open it up in Visual Studio. And I'm going to have another sip of water while that's doing it. Cool. So what do we want to do here? Well, first we want a way of knowing whether or not we're pressing down the mouse button. To do that, let's create a bool, which we'll call move or is pressing mouse. Whatever you want to call it, I'm just going to call it move, and I'm going to default it to false. Then we'll create a callback method called on. Actually, no, let's do this differently. Let's create a update method. And inside of our update method, we're going to check if input.get button down. And you can choose any button here. I'm just going to choose fire 1, which is going to default to the left mouse button. So if you're pressing down the left mouse button, we want to set move equal to true. Then on the other hand, if input.get button up, so if we release fire 1 left mouse button, so if we stop pressing our left mouse button, we want to set move equal to false. And we can actually see this working already if we save that and go into Unity. Now the move variable is definitely set to private, but if we go to the top right of our inspector and select debug, we can see that our move variable actually appears. So if we now hit play and start pressing, we can see it turns on, and if we then release, it turns back off. So yeah, now we're keeping track of whether or not we need to move. Of course, whether or not we need to move forward or rotate is going to depend on whether or not we're currently standing on a surface. But we'll figure that out in a moment. Let's start by just assuming that we always want to move forward. To do that, we'll create a void fixed update. And remember, the difference between update and fixed update is that update is used for getting input and fixed update is used for actually moving or controlling the physics of our car. And the reason why is that update is called every time we draw a frame. So a bunch of times a second, update will be called. And so it's nice for triggering input. And fixed update is called X amount of times a second. So it's called on a fixed update loop. And update can happen at any amount of times per second and can vary by a factor 1,000. It can really change a whole bunch, but fixed update will always be constant. So that's why we use it for physics updates. So here we can check if move is equal to true. Well, then we want to go ahead and move forwards. And in order to do that, we need a reference to a rigid body. So let's create a public rigid body 2D, and let's call it RB. Then if move is equal to true, we can set rb.add force, and here we can add a force in our car's forward direction. So that is transform.right, because this is 2D. So if we have a look here, this here is forwards, this here is up, and this here is right. So if we want our car to move forward in our 2D space, we want to use transform.right, which means the red arrow. So we can then multiply this transform.right with some kind of speed variable. So let's go to the top here and create a public float speed and set it equal to something like 20 by default. We probably also want to multiply this with time.fixed delta time. And that's because while fixed delta time while fixed update always runs on a fixed time step, this fixed time step is configurable and might not be the same for each system. So that's why we multiply with time.fixed delta time to make sure that no matter how we configure it and no matter what system we're on, we're always going to move at the same speed. And finally, I probably want to multiply with a round number like 100, because the amount of force that we're adding if we multiply with time.fixed delta time, which is normally pretty small, is going to be pretty minuscule unless we bump it up by about a factor 100. So that's why we multiply with a fairly large number here, so we don't have to be ridiculous when setting the speed value. And then finally, we can change the force mode, and we'll just set that to force, which I believe is also the default, but it's nice to be explicit about that. So now we should see that whenever we press down our left mouse button, we're going to move our car forwards. If we save this and go into Unity and hit play, we can test if that is true. So it's playing here, and I'm going to press down my mouse button, and we get a null reference exception. What is this? The reason why is, of course, we need to reference our rigid body in the inspector. So let's change out of debug mode to make this less confusing. And let's take our rigid body component here and drag it into our RB slot. Now, when we hit play, we should be able to actually move forwards. Yay! So now that we have our moving of the car in place, we also want to be able to rotate when we are in the air. However, in order to do that, we need to be able to see our car once it gets in the air. And right now, that's not kind of within our viewport. So let's make our camera follow around our rider. To do that, we'll create another component, and this is going to be our camera controller. Let's select C#, hit create an add, and reload solution. Double click it to open it up in Visual Studio. And we're going to create a very, very simple camera controller here. First, we need a reference to the target that we're tracking, in our case, our car or rider. And we'll make this of type transform and call it target. Then inside of our late update function, and this is another variant on the update. Update is called whenever the computer draws a frame. Fixed update is called whenever we should update physics, so a fixed amount of times per second. Late update is the exact same as update, but it's drawn after all of the other functions. So after we do our movement, after we update all of our game stuff and trigger input, then we call late update. And this is awesome for following around a car with a camera, because we only want to move our camera once our car has moved. When we've determined whether or not we need to move, then actually move the car, then we want to move the camera to follow him. We don't want to move the camera, then move the car, and then jump to next frame. That's just going to make for very jittery and weird behavior. So that's why we use late update. And all we need to do here is simply set our position, so transform.position, equal to our target's position. But we probably want to kind of offset our camera a little bit. So instead of setting it equal to target.position directly, let's go ahead and do a bit of calculation. Firstly, let's create a public vector3, and this is going to be our offset that we can adjust inside of the inspector. Then we can go and create another vector3 in here, which is going to be our new position for the camera. Let's set that equal to target.position plus the offset that we specify. Then of course we also want to go in and adjust new position.z to make sure that we don't change the z offset of our camera, since we probably just want to adjust that once, which is before we play the game, and not using these controls down here. I think it's nice to just position it once and then never change it again. And also because we're using orthographic, the z is not really going to matter unless it goes to 0 or above. In other words, we just want it to be pulled back further than the rest of our objects. If we switch into the scene view here, you can see that the camera can see all the objects right until it intersects, and then we can't see them anymore. But it's not like this is zooming. We use the size instead to zoom with our camera. All right. So we just want to make sure that we don't change the z, and we do that by setting new position.z equal to transform.position.z. So just retaining the old z position. And then finally we can set transform.position equal to our new position. Let's save that. Let's go into Unity. Let's hit play, and let's see if that works. And of course it doesn't, because again we need to set up this reference. So we need to make sure to drag in our rider into the target slot. And now when we play, we should actually see it working. So as you can see, it snaps right to the position of our rider. And I of course want to go ahead and offset our camera a bit. So I'm going to bump up the X here and also bump up the Y a bit. Something that like that looks a bit nicer, I think. So let's go ahead and maybe copy the settings of the component by right click, going copy component. Let's stop playing and then right click, paste component values. And there we go. We should now see that when we play the game again, our camera snaps to this offset. Awesome. So now we can actually start to play through our level, and we get to the part where our rider is floating in the air. This is where we can go ahead and rotate him. So we want to be able to check, is our car currently on the ground? Is he currently touching a line? Because if he is, we want to move him. If he's not, we want to rotate him. So let's go to the top here and create another boolean called is grounded, and we'll default that to false. Then we'll go to the bottom and let's create a callback method. So void on collision enter 2D. And if we just autocomplete this, it's going to fill out a bunch of information, but we don't actually want to gather any information about what we hit. We just want to know that we hit anything. At a later point, you probably want to check that what you've collided with is actually a line, because if you add coins and stuff, you don't want to have the car think that he's colliding with a line when he's actually just picking up a coin. Stuff like that, but right now all we have in here is lines, so that should be just fine. If not, you can go ahead and set up layers, you can go ahead and check for tags, all that good stuff. It should be fairly easy to do. But we just want to go ahead and say that if we enter, or on collision enter, whenever we hit something, we've hit a line, and so we're currently grounded. So we want to set is grounded equal to true. And we want to do the exact opposite thing when we are leaving a collision. So when we are no longer touching an object, we're no longer touching a line, and so we want to set is grounded to false. In other words, private void on collision exit 2D. And again, we don't want to gather any information here, but we do want to set is grounded to false. And there we go. Just to check that this is working, we can go and select our rider. We can change from normal mode to debug mode. I'm just waiting for the editor to compile here. There we go. And we should now see another variable here called is grounded. If we hit play, whenever we touch the ground, this gets enabled. And then as soon as we leave ground and go into the air, you can see it gets disabled. Awesome. So now we can use this through script down here whenever we are moving to check if is grounded. Well, in that case, we want to go ahead and add a force in the forwards direction that we are already doing. If it's not, so else, we want to go ahead and add rotation. So rb.add, and in terms of forces, we call a rotational force torque. So we want to add torque. And the amount of torque that we want to add is going to be dependent on another variable that we specify up here. So there's going to be a public float rotation speed. And we can maybe default that to something like, let's do 7. And again, we want to here, let's see, the amount of torque is going to be our rotation speed multiplied with time.fixed delta time, multiplied with 100, multiplied with speed. And let's multiply with speed first, so it's in the same order. And of course, not speed, but rotation speed. There we go. And we can, of course, also specify a force mode here, but let's just set that to force again, which is also the default. So if we now save this and go into Unity and hit play, we should be able to actually rotate once we get in the air. And the value might be off here, I have no idea. Okay, yeah, so it definitely is. So let's go ahead and decrease the rotation speed to something like 2, see if that's working. It might be that we shouldn't really multiply with 100, but with 2 instead to kind of even it out. No, I think that actually works really well with 2. So there we go, a rotation speed of 2. And we can go in and change the default here as well, so it doesn't bug out completely if we were to do this once more. Awesome. That's actually, I think I just realized that's all I wanted to show you guys in this video. We can, of course, go ahead and add a few more line segments. So we can go ahead and create another one of these purple ones here and move it over. And we can definitely go in and switch back to normal mode so we can see all of our Bezier curve handles here. And we can maybe add a bit onto this level just to make it a bit more exciting. So let's make this a bit further here. We can maybe make some kind of a steep hill here that we have to climb. And then we can maybe end in another green line segment. So let's take this line segment here. And I actually want to try and do something fun here. And I want to make this physics enabled. So I basically want this to be rotated around its center whenever we jump onto it. Let's see if that works. So in order to do that, I want it to be, centered around the transform of the object, because it's going to rotate around this point. So we don't want it to rotate like this. That's just going to look weird. Let's take a line here and move it up to around this point, so that we can imagine that it rotates around it, something like this. And then let's go ahead and move it down here and try to see how that works. Actually, maybe going to even flip it a tiny bit like this. And I think that's going to be pretty nice. Okay, so you might have seen an error there. Yep, I haven't really accounted for rotation on this script. So instead of flipping it, let's just go ahead and do it manually with the points like this. Sorry guys, this is not a complete editor extension or anything. I just really quickly modified this to work for this tutorial, and I think you can easily expand upon it if you want. I just want to show you guys how cool Bezier curves are, and the fact that you can actually do this. But there are some really nice extensions on the asset store that should help you do more advanced stuff with lines and Bezier curves. So okay, so now we actually have a bit more of an interesting level. But let's try and go ahead and add physics to this line segment. So in order to do that, we need to add another component, and we're going to add a rigid body 2D. Let's make sure to make this dynamic. Let's also bump up the mass to around maybe 100. And the same thing with the angular drag. I know that's a very, very big angular drag, but we're also going to have quite a bit of force on the rider, and I think it's actually going to work well. We're also going to freeze it on the X and Y position, and definitely not on the Z rotation, because we only want it to rotate and not move. So if we now hit play, I actually do believe that this should work. So of course the first one here is not physics enabled, but then the second one, once we get this far in the level, should actually, yeah, it rotates with a player. Hey, that's super easy, and it's something that the original rider game takes advantage of quite a bit. It often takes a chunk of the line and then makes it into a green line that is rotatable, so that you can go, you can drive through over that line onto a hoop and then back on to the green part. It's something they do quite a bit, and it's something that looks just really cool. So now you can go ahead and add all kinds of fun physics stuff, add coins, add score counters, go completely nuts. I hope you guys will enjoy it, and that's pretty much the end of the tutorial. Yay, we made it all the way. Only with a bit of messing up. I think I blacked out at about 30 minutes in there, but I think we made it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial, and now we're going to switch over to the Q&A. So let me just switch over here to Q&A chat mode. There we go. And you guys can go ahead and ask some questions. I'm just going to say real quick, of course, this is going to be uploaded to YouTube. So if you're just joining in and missed the tutorial, it is going to be on YouTube, don't worry. And I can see we're almost 400 viewers. That's awesome, guys. So thanks to all the people who are tuning in. And without further ado, ask me some questions, and I am going to attempt to answer them, guys. The Q&A here is going to be, or is always pretty much anything. If you have, of course, super technical questions are often hard to answer just right off the top of my head, and it's also something that doesn't make for a very interesting Q&A. But personal questions is fine, semi-technical questions are fine, suggestions, all that good stuff. So first questions, will you be in Ludum Dare 41? I really hope so. I've already written it into my calendar, and I'm really looking forward to the next Ludum Dare. So unless something stops me from being there, I definitely will be. So yeah, I'm really hoping to join. What do we have to do when we want the lines in rainbow color? If you want multiple colors over your line, you can use the texture glow like I showed you before, which allows you to change the glow of the line using a texture. That's pretty darn cool. Then you can just make a rainbow texture, and it should actually make the glow rainbow colored. Let's see, what is the hardware for making a game? I don't understand the question, I'm sorry. How do you stay happy all the time? Drugs. No, I'm kidding. I'm not happy all the time, guys, but I am happy most of the time, and that's probably because my job is very, very fun, and I have a lovely wife. So, how do you speak your name? Esbjorn. That's how. And you're not going to get me to say it again, because I'm just going to mess up my own name. What about making a tutorial about stealth games? So I do believe that Unity already has a, well, fairly old tutorial now about creating a stealth game, and I would definitely just recommend checking out that. Also, I'm just going to take my camera here and very quickly bump up the brightness a bit, because I think it got a tiny bit dark. So let me just do that. There you go. Now I can see you guys more clearly. That's not true. You can see me more clearly. I can see you just the same, but hey. How can I learn how to code my own scripts to make my own game? Well, there are a bunch of different ways for you to learn. It completely depends on how you prefer learning. I learned mostly through YouTube tutorials, so you could start there. Joining in on live streams like this one definitely helps, even though this is maybe more a bit towards intermediate users, since I go pretty quickly through the stuff. But I do have a course for complete beginners called How to Make a Video Game. Definitely check that out. And yeah, just lots and lots of practice. Did you make your website yourself? Really coded? Yeah, I did create the new Brackeys website from scratch using Jekyll. Jekyll is a static site generator. It's freaking awesome, and it only requires you to know a bit of HTML, CSS, and a tiny bit of jQuery or JavaScript. Now, I didn't use any JavaScript for the I don't think I used any JavaScript for the Brackeys website, but I did use a bunch of JavaScript for dev assets. But yeah, it's really, really fun to make websites, and whenever I do it, I really love it. I just haven't done it too much. Mobile controls in C#, that could actually be pretty fun to do. However, I do normally tend to stay away from mobile since I want to cover subjects that apply to both mobile games and standalone stuff and console and all that. I don't do console specific stuff, or at least I haven't done that yet, but maybe someday has got to be the day that I start doing that. Last time I'm asking, why do you have rotation speed squared? Do I have it squared? Did I square it? Did I multiply it? I'm sorry, one moment. Let's go ahead and investigate. Let's see. Whoa, and then I went infinite. Let's see here. Rotation speed. Oh, yeah, that shouldn't be the case. I'm sorry. That's probably why I had to decrease the number. That's because I did square it. So 2 times 2 is 4, and that's why I had to decrease it from 7 to 2 to get around the same movement. So thank you for solving that for me. And the answer to your question is I shouldn't have. So there we go. We do get the same behavior now. That was actually one of the less bad errors in terms of creating or squaring out a variable, because it only meant that once we set it, it did behave just fine and linearly. But yeah, it shouldn't be squared, and now it's fixed. I'm sorry. And we can go back to the Q&A. So thanks for pointing that out. Cool. So yeah, 2 plus 2 is 4. Did I say 8? I think I said 8. Yeah, it's 4. Whatever. You also saw that 7 was a bit faster, and actually maybe 4 is a better number. But that's for you to play around with. Quick math. Do you know how to code in PHP? I feel like I can read PHP fairly well. I'm not that great with PHP syntax, and so I don't feel comfortable in it, but I feel like I could pick it up fairly quickly. That being said, I've heard that PHP can get pretty hairy in certain situations, so I probably shouldn't say that. But yeah, I don't feel comfortable writing it. No, I have written it a tiny bit. Would you do a tutorial called how to make quests? If you're just talking about ordinary RPG quests, that's actually a pretty good idea, and sounds pretty exciting. I'll make sure to add it to the list. Do I know C or C++? That depends on what you mean by no. I have written some C++ code and found it to be really fun, and also sometimes very tricky. I have also written a tiny bit of C code, but it's not something that I feel nearly as comfortable in as, say, a C#, JavaScript, or Java. Hello, could you make a tutorial about Unreal Engine or native code? I would love to make a tutorial on Unreal at some point, but I will have to brushing up my Unreal skills beforehand, and that's probably what kind of is holding me away from doing it right now. It's just a time thing, because while I do feel I can do quite a bit of stuff in Unreal, I don't feel comfortable enough teaching it before I get some more experience under my belt. How to do a simple multiplayer? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. How to find a job? This is not something that I'm going to be the best person to give advice about, probably, because I haven't actually ever had to apply to a job in the tech industry. I've been pretty lucky there, and Brackeys has pretty much been my job since I quit or since I finished up my education. But I think from what I hear, the primary thing is building a portfolio and getting lots of experience. I know that's really annoying. The best way to get a job is by having jobs, but that is truly true. So yeah, recommendations, building out a portfolio, a strong portfolio, and experience. Very, very little education. That I hear that doesn't matter too much anymore. How old are you? I am 20 years old. How can we clamp player rotation to say, this is too technical, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer it right now. Will you make some tutorials on procedural generation, especially around generating buildings, details like trees and boulders in tech? I've created a few videos on procedural generation, primarily on covering noise, per the noise, and terrain generation. That sounds a bit more technical and something that would take longer time, but I would definitely love to do more on procedural generation. However, if you do want to know more about procedural generation, I suggest you check out Sebastian Lake. He's just awesome, and he has a lot of stuff on procedural stuff or generation. Can you make the tutorials of shrinking? Oh, can I make a tutorial on how I made shrinking planet? I think that's what you're referring to. Maybe it depends on what part of the game. I mean, it did take me a total of 48 hours to make, and so if I had to make tutorials on that while explaining everything, they would be insanely long. So probably not. but I might take a certain mechanic from it if there's something in particular that you're interested in. But yeah. Could you show us how to make custom assets in Blender, or is there a YouTube tutorial? I do have a basic Blender tutorial. Check it out. Not a lot of people know about it. It's decent. So go check out my Blender tutorial if you want. Any tips for getting a good game dev internship in a AAA company? Nope, I don't have any tips whatsoever. I'm so sorry on your... Okay, rapid firing through these questions. I should really take a breather here, guys. I'm trying to answer as many questions as possible. Which phone do you use? I use a iPhone 6. I've actually never really had an Android. So I just use iPhone. I'll probably switch soon. Maybe. If this one breaks, I imagine picking up an Android, but we'll see. Yeah, don't quote me on that. Brackeys, I see your all video. Thanks, man. Can you make a tutorial on how to make a chat? And if you have, please give me link. I haven't made a tutorial on multiplayer chatting in a lobby. No, I have not. And I don't really plan on it right now. But it sounds very interesting. And like something I would want to do at some point. Where am I from? I'm from Denmark. I'm based in Copenhagen. Can you make a tutorial about AI enemies like dead cells, not just like Mario? Okay, I see what you mean. No, I'm probably not going to make a tutorial series on sophisticated enemy AI. Now I haven't played Dead Cells, but I imagine that they are pretty sophisticated. If you want to create AAA quality AI with smells, memory, kiting techniques, all that jazz, you can go ahead and check out Rain Indie, which is a really good plugin for Unity or AI solution. So yeah, check that out, Rain Indie. I know the basics of C# and I understand coding, but I can't write code. Can you help me, please? This is just a matter of practice, actually. I think everybody gets to a point where they've seen some basic tutorials. They know what an if statement is. They know that you can write code and you can press dot and it will access the different functions in a class. They have kind of this vague idea of what a class is, maybe, and what functions can be used for. But the syntax is just not there, and you don't know all the functions that you have at your disposal. Simply, you don't have knowledge of the API that Unity uses. I think everybody gets to that point, and when you're there, you're close. You're really close. From there, it's just a matter of trying to write simple scripts on your own or taking other people's scripts and modifying them to suit your needs. And once you've done that enough times, it will just kind of start to float off the top of your head. Use the Unity API a bunch. When I was at this point, I actually went on vacation and I didn't have internet access, but I had the downloaded version of Unity's documentation. And so I was forced to kind of figure out some of these things on my own. I couldn't just Google all the problems. So I sat there looking through the documentation and tried a bunch of different things until I got the syntax right, until I found the correct function that I needed to use and or set up the code in the right way. So going from understanding code to being able to logically write it and get the syntax right and know all the function is a step. But it's not the biggest step. So yeah, you're close. Just keep going. How to do a simple multiplayer, variables that you can read, take from other computers. Use UNet. I have a tutorial on Unity networking. There are different tutorials online. Can you do a video about database integration with Unity? I'm not too good when it comes to databases. It's not really my strength. So I probably am not the one to ask, but I might do something at some point. Would you upload this live stream to your YouTube channel? Yes, it will go up on YouTube. I learned coding through your multiplayer tutorial. Hey, that's awesome. That's a pretty advanced tutorial to learn coding from, so I'm really glad that you were able to use it. Do you know how to make a random level generator like which in the Temple Run? Yeah, I do know how to create such a random generator. It's actually, the one in Temple Run is actually fairly simple if I remember it correctly, because it's just a matter of instantiating in different prefabs. So basically you're just chaining together prefabs that you create semi-randomly. Just make a bunch of assets and choose from them from a list, and then in certain cases you will have to eliminate certain possibilities because you don't want a right turn and then a left turn right after where they kind of intersect, but you want it to create logical roads, but still, yeah. I learned coding from school and from you, Brackeys, so thanks. Oh, thanks, man. I'm really glad that I was able to help. Do a tutorial series on making a 2D sandbox survival game like Terraria. No! That's simply too many words in one sentence. That would be 100 videos long. Yeah, start with some of the basic videos, start with some of my 2D videos, and then expand from there. I think that should kind of get you going, and then you can try and add more stuff to it on your own. I want to thank you with the unit tutorials that started my career. Now I just have to get old and be able to own a company. That's awesome. I'm glad I was able to help with those. Will you test my first game when it's finished? Definitely send games to me on Twitter, guys. It's always fun to see what you guys are working on. Thanks so much for spending your time to teach us. You're doing so great. Go on. Guys, you guys are making me blush. Please stop this. Too many compliments. More questions, less compliments. I cannot take it. You guys are too sweet. VR tutorial, please. That would be awesome. Still have to get my hands on a headset though. I started C# and Unity with you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, okay. So guys, any secret portfolio tricks? Yeah, try and make something visual. Just something that seems interesting to look at. I mean, I think a problem a lot of people run into with their portfolios is they think that, well, when someone goes through my portfolio, they're looking at all the stuff that I made. Not necessarily. A hiring manager will usually just kind of look very quickly, skim through what you've done, and if nothing interesting catches their eye, they're probably just going to discard it. And so you need to make it pop. You need to make it look interesting right away, and then maybe they'll take a second look. So yeah, something visual always works. And okay, so final questions, guys. We're wrapping up very, very soon. When will be the next Unity tips? Oh, I could actually go ahead and create another Unity tips video soon. That would be pretty fun. I should add that to the list. I'm 14 years old and I know C# and Python. Should I learn Unity? Is it going to be effective in 2018 or later? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. For a bunch of different technologies, both for game development, also for science, simulation, education, VR. Unity is pretty much at the center of it all right now. So yeah, learn Unity. It's awesome. If you want to. When will you upload stream to YouTube? Tomorrow evening at 9 p.m. UTC, I think. Can I call a method inside a method? Yes. What is a rider? Rider is the game. Drag and drop tutorial. Yeah, that could be interesting. There's going to be a Unity update, right, where C# will change. Not drastically, I don't think. There are going to be some updates to how we write scripts, yes, with the new C# job system that's going to expand upon it quite a bit, but you can still write scripts in the same way as far as I understand so far. Where can I send you what I've made from your tutorials? Twitter. Yeah, post stuff to me on Twitter. That's awesome. How do I learn C#? Keep going at it. And I think, guys, can you make a video about mechanism and animation stuff? I would love to at some point. Do you have any experience with the Godot engine? And if so, would you make tutorials on it? I have 0 experience, and if so, yes, looks fun. If you guys want me to. Hearthstone like simple game tutorial. I've created a video recently where I show how to create cards in Hearthstone using scriptable objects. That's probably as far as I'm going to go. But if you want a particular mechanic, definitely let me know. And there we go. That kind of wraps the questions for this live stream. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I just had a lot of fun. And another question is, how long is my hair? It goes to here, so fairly long, but I did cut it recently, so it's not crazy anymore. But we can maybe end on that. Let me just loosen this up, and we can say thanks for watching, guys. I had a bunch of fun. If you want to support the live stream and future tutorials and all the stuff that we're currently putting out, I suggest you go to Patreon at patreon.com/Brackeys. I'm just going to put it inside of the Twitch chat here. There you go, patreon.com/Brackeys. It's a way for you to donate a monthly amount of your choosing. You can cancel it at any time, and I offer some humble rewards in return. People are saying I look like hipster Jesus. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know how Jesus looked, but it wasn't this. But do I work in the Black Abyss? No, this is just a screen, guys. Don't worry, there's something behind it. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the stream, or are enjoying the content, definitely go to Patreon. And thank you so much to the people who are already supporting over there. It really means the world to us. It's a huge part of our income, and especially now that we are multiple people, it's just really, really awesome. So thanks for supporting, and thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye everyone. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in December, and a special thanks to Judaman, Beffio, Infinity PBR, Uri Omer, Hans Hoftoon, Cyborg Mummy, Derek Heemskirk, Mur, Faisal Marify, Beardo Die, DoubleTap45, James P, Dan Evans, Thomas Worley, Superman the Great, John Beauregard, Cole Cabral, Jason Latito, Alex Rakitsky, Suni Jakobsen, James Rogers, Robert Bund, Rob Farn, and Erasmus.